So we will get right into the meat of things here. I'll start back off with you, Anne. Can you kind of walk us through what practices have been successful in your work in evaluation with the coalitions?
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Meredith. That's a great question. Well, I introduced myself as a community psychologist. And for those of you who are going like, what is that? Community psychologists are really interested in community level intervention, community level work. So policy systems and environmental change and really engaging, our diverse community, all aspects of the community. That really is our principle and our value system. So to me, it always starts there, engaging the community, engaging them in the work of kind of creating the vision. Yeah, so I would say, that's where I always default and start. And I think when we don't engage the community, or if we look around the table of our community, whether you call it a coalition or a collaborative, if it doesn't look like the community, you're already in trouble, right? That has got to be job one. Everything else that we do in evaluation has to flow from that community engagement and that participatory approach.
I love that. That's awesome. Grace, I will have the same question here for you. What practices have been successful in your evaluation work with the coalition?
Yeah, so I think listening, this dovetails with what Anne said. And in public health, one of the ways that we think about this and conceptualize this is just called cultural humility, which quite frankly is a fancy way of saying approaching communities and approaching this kind of work, not assuming that you have all the answers, right? And so really my role as an evaluator is to listen and learn first. Um, and and I love being a perpetual student in that way. If I didn't, I never would have gone and got a PhD. I can guarantee that. But I think just listening, and it sounds so simple. A lot of the times evaluation sounds like a fancy word and you think it's got all these, fancy approaches. And sometimes it can, like, right. I mean, I'm not trying to, underscore that, but I think really just listening to your partners and asking a core question of what do you want to accomplish? And I think more importantly, what do you want to accomplish together? And so that's really starting there. I think that's the core question. And then coming in and literally just listening to what they say, and facilitating a space and a conversation where, and as Anne just said, like it needs to be representing the community, but also once it's representative of the community, you got to hold space for everybody's voice to be heard whenever you're convening. And so I think that that's a piece of it, is just really listening and making sure as the evaluator, I facilitate space for every person at the table when we're asking these important questions to speak.
That's great. Thank you so much, Grace. I'll kind of keep it open to both of y'all on these, so you can have either first dibs or second dibs, whichever one, as we get into some of these other ones. So let's talk about data. What types of data do you think coalition leaders should be prioritizing to effectively measure the impact of their work in the trauma-informed space? What have you seen that's been impactful?
Grace, you want to take a turn and go first?
Sure. I think, there's the data that we have very intentionally collected around events, like a pre-post survey, for example, Meredith. I'm thinking on some of the regional coalition events that we've done together, right? That gives us a before and an after point in time and gathering, participants' perceptions and how those perceptions or attitudes or knowledge or even familiarity with a certain sort of trauma-informed vocabulary might have changed, right? And so those quantitative data, survey data, are super important. What I also say is, and as somebody who, since I got my PhD, have really ventured away from just being quantitative and way more into the mixed method space, I think that the most valuable data that we've gotten really has been through these structured, what I would semi-structured interviews with our family connections coordinators. So in Resilient Northeast Georgia, one of our main partners has been Family Connections, and just really checking in periodically and having semi-structured interviews a couple times a year has been so informative and helpful in us understanding not just the functionality of the partnership, but also sort of how the coalition is being perceived, what the barriers are, what the strengths are, what the opportunities are. And I think that having that perspective of each of those county sort of anchor leaders has been really, really helpful and has given us the depth of data that perhaps those survey data I discussed wouldn't have given us. That gives us the breadth, that gives us some high level sort of statistical touch points around the events we are doing, but these listening sessions really have given us more depth.
That's great. Back over to you, Anne.
Okay. Yeah. So I think I would probably start with the word, impact. Before I answer your question, Meredith, let's just start with it. I don't love that word. I took a complexity class recently, and they showed, what is impact, and it was like this big, like meteor had hit Earth, boom, and it was a big hole. I don't think the word really helps. It's kind of falling out of favor in the evaluation world. Now I say that, and then I've got a big. I've got one of our clients is federally funded, and their project officer loves that word impact. But when we're talking about the work that we do, which is really complex and messy, we've got like multiple partners, and the issues that we're dealing with, are not simple. They are complex. Then I think we really need to think about more of if you think about, being at the riverside and throwing a pebble in the water, right? So what are the ripple effects that our work is having? So I think that visual, that metaphor is kind of where I start. So you're never going to claim that your community coalition or collaborative has made you alone are responsible for all of these things. But how can we claim that we do have some impact, some effect on this ripple effect, right? So that's kind of that's the kind of the metaphor that I like to start with. So I'm kind of thinking about that, and how you draw that out to me is always with that vision, whether that be a logic model or a theory of change or some kind of visioning process that helps everybody get on, the same page, and helps us make hard decisions about what kind of data we're going to collect. Because frankly, we work in a lot of communities that have been a little traumatized, maybe a lot traumatized when it comes to data collection. So we need to be really mindful of that. We always use mixed methods, whether that be, a traditional survey, but we do key informant interviews and focus groups, and we also have fun, creative ways to collect data. And I'll try to share a little bit about that as kind of we go on, but yeah.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Can I also
Yes.
add, Anne just brought up a point that made me think about, I think that a lot of people think about evaluation as zero sum, right? Like either you show that there's no effect or you show that it's had this completely revolutionary impact and changed the world and decrease, sorry guys, there's more in there, a disease state, right? Whether that's behavioral health or whatever, adverse outcomes. So I think that is another thing I would encourage is, and I love the analogy or the metaphor and about this ripple effect, right? Like it's not necessarily about showing that you completely eliminated a problem.
Right.
It's sometimes it's about showing that you had a measurable effect on just a very specific thing, right? Or an increased engagement on X, or a change in perception on Y, like in terms of using just like algebraic terms, right? So I just think don't think about it as zero sum. You don't feel the need to show that you have absolutely eliminated a problem with your intervention. I think that there are so many other things that you can show that would constitute efficacy or effectiveness of an intervention without thinking that you have to solve the state of the world. I mean, Clearly Resilient Georgia has really aspirational goals, and that's important, right? We've got to have those. And that's back to Anne's verbiage about a theory of change. Like and logic model, like we believe that this kind of work is what's going to change the world, and that eventually it will decrease adverse health outcomes across the behavioral health spectrum. But I think before that, we've got to make smaller incremental changes, right? And see gains. And so I think that I would just really encourage people not to see it as zero sum. It's not 0-1. Did you change the world or solve the world's problems or not?
Yeah,
and I think
exactly. Yeah, and Grace, I bet you can relate to this. I think the public health approach to prevention is just so valuable, right? If we think about, like, if I'm teaching out in communities, I often will show a picture of my kid with his fishing hook where he tried to catch a shark and there's just a hook, or juxtapose that with a big shrimp boat with a huge net, right? So if we choose the right public health intervention, we can reach as many people as possible and have that kind of effect. But when we and what we tend to do is programs, right? We tend to go to the low-hanging fruit, and what that leaves us in terms of evaluation are things we can count, which is important. You know, I love a good process evaluation. But yeah, we got to connect all those things, connect that vision with the right intervention, with the right measurement, you know, engaging the community, all of these things.
That's awesome. I love hearing y'all talk about the public health approach to this evaluation work. I think it's so important when we think about the Resilient Georgia Coalition work of this. Let's break it down a little bit more, though. Let's get into, what recommendations would y'all have for coalitions who are just starting out, who are new to the evaluation game on a grant like this, who are defining their structure right now? How would you guys break it down for those new coalitions?
Grace, do you want to? I'll go or you can go. I mean, I
Yeah.
went twice, so you can go if
It's all
you
good.
want.
I'm not keeping count. It's all good. I think that the most important thing and the coolest thing is that the way that Resilient Georgia has faced this intervention has been that the coalitions have slowly come on board. So I think the first thing we do is take an inventory about what these other peers have done, right? What have the other coalitions have done? How have they approached evaluation? Because we're all working towards the same goal. And that's to improve, behavioral health, especially for birth to 26 across straight. So we're all working on that. Everybody's taking a wildly different approach to that, but that's the cool thing about it. So I think like really learn from one another. This peer-to-peer network calls are so awesome. And I think that is such a gift, is that no one who's coming on board right now is starting from year zero. Everyone who's coming on right now has all these other years to learn from. So that is the first thing I would say, is lean into your peers hard and forge those relationships and spend the time. And, an hour spent on a call like this could save you months in labor on something that you just couldn't even have anticipated, because the learning curve is so intense on some of this work, right? I especially think about some of our rural counties and some of the stigma associated with behavioral health, and thinking about some of the really tough issues that I've seen emerge time and time again. I mean, another example is trying to get criminal justice stakeholders to the table to really engage. And I think, that's something that Meredith, we've seen time and time again, and the communities are commonly struggling with some of the same things, right? And so learning from one another is first and foremost. And then I think the second thing is, and I don't say this as lesser or the second thing you do, but just the second thing I'll say is that listening piece. Listen to your partners early, often. The question that I said that's central is the theory of change, that language that Anne uses in evaluation world is, what are you trying to accomplish together? How do you think the world's going to be different because of this intervention, right? And so I think those are the two first and foremost things. I think if you do those two things, you're light years ahead of even where we were when we started this work. I don't know however many years ago, right?
Yeah, and I think I would add to that, one of the things that I've seen with the Resilient Georgia coalitions that I'm working with is really that need to spend time thinking about and talking about and training on community collaboration. It's something we take as a given, and yet it is just so hard. So my poor little summer garden is about had it, like out here. It's kind of, telling me we're at the end, but there was a lot of, there was weeding and there was fertilizing and there was watering and all sorts of kinds of things that I had to do to get that garden to grow. And the same is true of your community coalition. So a lot of folks, jump in and get started, and it's not just Resilient Georgia, it's any kind of coalition collaborative. Yay, we got money, we're going to go out and do this thing. But collaboration is hard. Partnering is hard. There's always going to be conflict. It's just the nature of the beast. And trying to herd the cats. I often start with that video in my training. It's a real thing. So just kind of normalizing for folks, what is community collaboration? What does that mean when we collaborate? What are some of the principles and the values that we're going to operate on? What are the agreements we're going to have in place as we kind of get down to the business of creating this vision in our community? Once you do that, once you get everybody's buy-in, it just makes everything else flow so much easier.
That's awesome. So I think we've heard a lot about kind of the evaluative piece. We've talked a lot about the community engagement piece. Let's talk a little bit about the outcomes. How are we sharing those outcomes? So to either one of you guys, how can coalitions really transform the evaluation and the really rich data that they're getting to be more engaging and story driven? And how do you tell the story of what you're doing, essentially?
Well, I'll hop in here. So sharing data is probably one of like my happy places, because people are really kind of, scared of data. So telling that story is really, really important, but it starts with collecting the right data, right? So, and to me, it's got to be, we talked about process, and that's just a fancy word of saying like count the things that we did, but it really is more than that. It's more about implementation. So measuring the implementation and measuring the outcome. So it gets back to that vision, whether you call it a theory of change or a logic model, whatever you call it, right? Everything's got to be connected back to that vision. And then the data has to be collected to that vision. And then that's the story. So when we're writing evaluation reports, we're telling the story of the coalition. So we're telling that story of the partnerships, of the implementation, of the outcomes that the group has contributed to, and where they see that vision going, in the future. So it's all of those things to tell the story. And so we do it in lots of different ways, whether that be taking the qualitative and the quantitative and marrying it as part of that story, using great data visualization. So please, for the love of cheese, no pie charts with more than 3 categories. Please, please, please. If you don't remember anything else, don't do that. So yeah, so connecting all the data to the story, and I'll hush because I'm probably rambling. I get super excited about this stuff.
So I would say that every single coalition really needs to think about having a basic toolkit at their disposal. And one of the things in the toolkit would be like one for explaining who you are and what you do and what you hope to achieve. And I think those assets, like a one pager explaining that, a one pager or even a half page about like what you saw with year one of your coalition, like taking some things from, for example, from your annual report, boiling it down so that it is relatable, translational, simple to understand. And yeah, I think, it's 2024. We've all got access to Canva, right? Which is incredible. But I think we got to use it wisely and judiciously. And I think really making sure the data visualizations actually tell the story that you want to tell. But I think spending some time with your team early to really plot out, okay, here are going to be our mechanisms for storytelling. And don't shy away from telling that story every time you get a chance. Don't assume that people around you know what your coalition is or what Resilient Georgia is. Never assume that. Give the same 30, 45-second, 60-second elevator pitch every time you get in front of any group of people ever, okay? And you do that over and over and over and over again until people understand when you walk in a room. When Meredith Lysalt walks in a room, everybody's Resilient Northeast Georgia, and that's because it comes with showing up time and time and time again and saying not just what organization you're associated with, but what you're trying to achieve. So I think the storytelling has to be front and, first and foremost, and has to be super clear for people. People aren't going to just automatically get it or just know immediately what Resilient Georgia is all the time. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't. So those storytelling components into your daily work, right? It's not just an annual report at the end of the year that takes all your data analysis and shows what you've been doing. It's daily lifting, even small, tiny storytelling. Hey, we had this summit in June. This many people attended. We saw a 95% shift in perceptions around the definition of this word. And we think that's important because we're growing a vocabulary that's changing the way people think about trauma, right? That's just a snippet or an example of how you might do it really quickly. But I just think, we're socialized, and we're mostly females on this call, so I'm gonna speak to this, but I think we're socialized, especially as women in this country, not to talk about our achievements, and you got to get out, you got to get away from that. You've got to talk early and often about the wins, even if they're small. And you've got to talk about that in a really clear, concise way that appeals not just to nonprofit communities, but to business, to all these other sectors. We've got this sector map from Resilient Georgia, which is beautiful. So thinking about how you can speak to different kinds of sectors and do that storytelling so that it really connects with different people from different cross sections. So again, I think, the bottom line is what Ann said. This is the part I really love. It's the translational piece. So it's get some assets in your toolkit, whether that's your elevator pitch, your one pager, a quarterly sort of update on your social about what you're seeing and what you're doing. Do that storytelling early and often. Don't be shy about it, because people aren't going to know about your intervention or just visit your website randomly. That's not going to happen. Right. So you've got to do the storytelling and not just rely on your annual report.
Yeah. Grace and I have never met each other before, but I can tell we sing out of the same songbook. I often teach about telling your program success stories, and we usually start with just what Grace is saying, that elevator pitch. And guys, that would be a great interactive activity for your coalition. That would be so much fun. Have folks, develop their elevator pitch, have them practice it. That's awesome. You can blow that up to be that one paragraph spotlight on your website. You can take that to be your one pager that could be a press release or on your website or in your report. Lots of creative ways. You don't have to have like a social media expert in the room. You can repurpose your content. And as Grace is saying, like say the same great thing like over and over, right? And then there's lots of low cost ways to collect that information. You could put a little thing, I think we talked about this last week with one of my coalitions, right? At the bottom of your meeting agenda, have just a tear out that people can share, a success that they've experienced in the last couple of months. You do want it to be timely. You don't want it to be like 5 years ago, we had, 150 people at our, community summit, right? You want it to be timely, but lots of low cost ways that we could talk about in terms of, collecting and telling a good story, but make it connect. And also I would say, make it brief. You don't need a 100-page report to tell your story of the good work that you've done.
While we're on it, I don't want to lose that thread of what are some great low-cost ways that you guys have seen? What are some ways that these coalitions that we can all really engage more with our data translation? How do we share this story?
Oh my gosh. Data parties, data placemats, data walks, sharing little pieces of data and having people tell the story of it. I don't know. There's 4 right there.
Yeah, I like the card model, that's been used for around education. I mean, I think with Resilient Georgia, I mean, also just think I've mentioned this already, but get on Canva and find a one-page, clean, simple template that don't worry about content. Just Google one-page flyer template, okay? Or in the search bar, I use the word verb Google, y'all know what I mean. In Canva, search bar, look for it, okay? Scroll until you find one that really attracts your eye, the design elements, right, that really attract your eye. And typically it's going to be something pretty simple. And then adapt it, brand it to your coalition, and do some storytelling with that. Maybe the what, the why, the how, the when, right? I like to ask the teams that I work with or organizations that I work with when we start with evaluations, like, what are you trying to accomplish? In what time frame, right? How and why? Some of those just primary questions. If you can just get that, spend, a little bit of time with your coalition getting that right and making sure everybody agrees that the story that you're telling with that is consistent with how all the partners who are engaging sort of see the vision. And that goes back to Anne's idea about an elevator pitch, getting together. This is a fun exercise, right? Like maybe start with the elevator pitch exercise, generating that. And then, it's not free or low cost in terms of like your time. You're going to spend a little bit of time on it. But if you get that right from the get-go and everybody is coalescing around the same vision and the same storytelling elements, and then you have that one pager, and literally everywhere you go, you've just got that either digitally share with a QR code or to give that one pager out. Hey, this is our coalition. This is what we're doing. Read about it. Then you've got something that you can give to people and they can really just think about how they want to use it, or how they might use it. The other thing that I often do, and I do think this is important, every time I have an opportunity to get in front of a group of people, and this is with some other work that I do that's been a big piece of my career at UGA, which is the Wellbeing Project, I'll say at the end of a presentation, hey, if there's one thing you walk away and do today, tell somebody about the Wellbeing Project. Tell them about it, right? Like charge your audience with an action, right? With an action item. And that could even be in an introduction. If you have a chance to introduce yourself, hey, I'm Grace Bagwell Adams. I am evaluating for this incredible thing called Resilient Northeast Georgia. I want you to go to their website today and check it out, right? If I have slides, I might even put a QR code up there and be like, hey, y'all, get your phone out, snap a picture of this. I want you to go back and look at it later. But give them an action item, give them homework to do, engage them in that way. And you'll be surprised, I think, at how many people take you up on it. Not everybody will, right? Not 100%, but they will never know if you don't give them a chance. So I think those are some ideas, Meredith, that in terms of funding, don't take a lot of funding. They do take a commitment and like careful stewardship, but I do think they can.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that those are really great ideas. Thank you guys so much for sharing those. We are in kind of our last 5 minutes of this question, so I will be mindful of time and wrap it up with 1 to 2 questions here before we open it up to all of y'all's fantastic questions. I think this is one of my very favorite ones that came in from y'all who RSVP'd to this. How can coalition leaders really use the data to advocate for sustained funding, for the match component for these grants, for ongoing opportunities here?
Well, I kind of feel like, sorry,
You go for
Grace.
it.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I kind of feel like we've already talked about that a lot, making that connection between what you're doing and the community results, and telling that story in a really compelling way. So to me, it always starts with, home base. So what that vision is, and your evaluation plan, your collections, your data collection process comes out of that connection, and that's the story you want to tell. So when we're writing evaluation reports, it's it really is the what, so what, now what process. Here's what we did, here's why it was important, this is who we engaged, this is the kind of impact or outcomes that we had, and here's where we think we want to go next. Yeah, really tying all of those pieces together, so it really is a story. You're reporting, and I know reporting can be really difficult when you haven't connected your data collection with your reporting process. So really kind of laying out the breadcrumbs that makes people want to join a winning team, right? So they see the value. And we've talked about lots of different ways of sharing those reports. We've talked about infographics and one-pagers and websites and success stories. All of those things help tell the story and will ultimately make you more sustainable.
So I'll add to that, we've talked a lot about the what in terms of like asset developed and a little bit about the why, but I also want to talk about the who. And I think our coalitions, like if what you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about funding, and you're really talking about resources, which are people and time. And I think the coalitions early and often have to get comfortable leveraging the support that they've received from Resilient Georgia to go after other funding, right? And whether that's family foundations, whether that's federal dollars, state dollars. And so there's different pathways to different pots of money. But I think that is where evaluation can really, it's necessary, because you're not going to get additional supporting dollars typically unless you can show that you're having some impact in some sort of way, right? And that's really how this funding, I think, can work at its finest. And I see that already working in some communities this way. But really saying, okay, here's what we've been able to do with this amount of money and this amount of time, and this is what we hope to do in the next 3 to 5 years. And this goes back to the logic model, which is just really a roadmap for the what and the when you're going to do in what amount of time to accomplish change, right? So if you're talking about state money, though, I think, and I've heard Resilient Georgia talk about this too, there is an advocacy piece at the state level with policymakers, right? Like part of this is education and awareness for our policymakers. And you've got to educate and make them aware of what's going on and what you're trying to accomplish before you can expect for them to dole out cash, right? And I think being able to help them draw a line between all the problems we're seeing with overdose and loss of life to suicide and all of these issues and what we're trying to do on the prevention side, because from public health standpoint, prevention is the way, but it's really hard to show. People can't immediately understand the counterfactual. The counterfactual is the state of the world that would have happened if we'd never done the intervention. It's actually really hard to show that from a prevention standpoint, right? You can do it, but it's difficult. So I think telling that story not just to like traditional funders, but also to policymakers, and getting in front of elected officials, letting them knowing what you're doing, helping inform them, build that vocabulary, their trauma-informed vocabulary, just alongside your other community partners. Because you're never going to get money if you don't. So especially at that state level, because of stigma and all this other issues, like there's so many people at the table trying to get resources. So you've got to get in there too. And I think that that's a hard thing, and as a state employee, I'm not actually the one not supposed to be doing that kind of work. But as a policy person, I can encourage you and say that that is a big piece of, I think, this puzzle is leveraging your results, leveraging your coalition for advocacy work at the local, county, state level, not just for policy change, but for funding. Meredith, I hope that answers your question.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. I will ask you guys one last question before we wrap up to the bigger Q&A session. Take 30 seconds here. What is the biggest thing that you've learned from this work with the coalitions? If you had one takeaway from this work, what would it be? Easy question to end on, I know. Just one thing.
One thing.
I think that another life I'll be a social worker. But what I've learned is that the strengths-based approach is essential whenever it comes to coalitions. And I think you got to look around and see what partners are already doing the work and how can you link arms with them so that you're not conflicting with them. And Ann already said, community work's hard. It's messy. It is. It's really, really hard. And you know, everything is built on trust and relationship. And so you've got to figure out where the players are that are already, you know, working every single day, and link arms with them and say, how can we resource you? How can we help you? And that's what I think in Resilient Northeast Georgia, that partnership with Family Connection has unlocked so many doors because they were already there. They're already doing the work. And some of these people, community coordinators, have been doing that work 25, 30 years. You know, they know more than we do, right? And so honoring that and honoring the work that they do just put us, again, light years ahead of where we would have been if we tried to start something new just on our own. So just strengths-based asset building, really partnering with the people that they're already doing the work.
That's
Yeah,
incredible.
I think I would, for me, it would be the one thing I've learned is kind of what I knew all along is that programs are never going to get us where we want to be, right? If we really want to change our community, it really is about policy systems and environmental change. We can have a backpack program, and that's a lovely thing to feed a child for the weekend, but that is not going to eliminate poverty in our community. So it is hard, it is messy, and it's complex, and you all know that. But if we can just dig in together and create that community vision, will there be issues? Yes. Will there be conflict? Yes. But it is possible. And I don't think Tiffany's on the call anymore, but in our Northwest Georgia report, we did a little like shout out to Gilmer County because they really were able to implement a really lovely, you know, a workforce housing initiative in the community after several, you know, years of work. So it is possible to create those policy systems and environmental changes. Yeah. So stay with it.
Well, there you have it, folks. Grace, Ann, thank you guys so much. I will now open it up to any questions, comments, concerns, anything else we got going on. Come off mute, raise your hand. But I really want to thank you guys both for your time and your expertise on this. What do we got from the chat here, guys?
I'll make a comment. I really loved the visual, Anne, that you mentioned of that ripple effect because it, at least for me, I'm a visual learner. And so seeing it as not like a one-time event, like, okay, we saved the world from all of the challenges that we're seeing in our day-to-day, but it's more of seeing that small stepwise process. And from what I've learned, and Anne works closely with us at Resilient Middle Georgia, and you've been instrumental at helping me tell the story to our coalition partners. And the biggest thing that I've learned within the coalition for Resilient Middle Georgia is that people want a sense of identity. They want to feel like they belong as part of this group. And so our evaluation process should be helping them feel like, okay, I can merge my work, I can merge my information, we can share resources because I feel like I belong. It goes back to what Grace was saying of, you know, honoring, we're not stepping over toes, we're not trying to take your information, but we want to honor and really highlight this bigger picture. And so I really appreciated just that perspective.
Thanks, Doris. I wish I could clone you.
See, Michael, did you have your hand up?
I would just say it's so important. I mean, like you talk about the environmental change, public policy advocacy, if you can do good work, but if you're still in the same human services space and the same people speaking to each other, and you have to get, you know, the decision makers and leaders of the community, whether that's mayor, a city manager, the head of the hospital, things like that, to then come on board and advocate, because they can put so much more resources and ability and awareness to the needed programs and change without doing all the work either. I mean, they can just help you row so much faster if you get them on board. One thing we've seen, we've been doing a lot of partnering with, you know, homeless outreach, and the need of homelessness is costing us money one way or the other, and community development and workforce development. Well, now the fire chief and the hospital have gotten together to go out and do outreach to give water, food, and see people with medical conditions so that they don't end up in the hospital or calling ambulance services for, non-essential emergencies. And it's really changed their whole eyes of the need and issues and the humanity side of things that we all see, but they've connected the dots of the cost and versus the effort. It's a lot easier to get somebody some water and food than them be dehydrated and then in the hospital, for 3 days, taking up beds. But they can make a lot more change as the fire chief, police chief, and the hospital than I ever could with this call to action. And so I think we're also limited with time and effort. It's focusing the effort to those right decision makers. That if you can get them in your corner, you can really, move faster to the objective.
Thanks, Michael. Andrea, I see your hand up. What you got for us?
Yeah, I was wondering if y'all could speak to something that's challenging, or I've felt challenged by, which is like measuring the ripples, but constant coalition building happening at the same time, and how that can be kind of makes you feel like you're balancing two different things simultaneously. But if you don't, you're gonna lose one of those two things. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Right.
How to manage that?
Right. Well, Andrea, because I work with you guys, we're doing both, right? We're both measuring the development of the coalition and the strategies that you are designing and putting into place. It really is possible to walk and chew gum at the same time. And we have to do that, right? We have to know, is the coalition developing? Do you have, bylaws in place? Are people satisfied? Are people, stepping up to the work? As well as, and how successful are we in intervening? They're not, separate things. I don't ever build in an evaluation for a coalition or a collaborative that doesn't also measure the health and wellness of the collaborative itself.
I think that it's this issue of what you with formative and summative evaluation, which is to say, let's look at how we can collect information as we're implementing a program and use that information to inform the implementation to make that better. That's the formative piece. The summative is looking back and saying, did we accomplish what we wanted to? And doing both is important and doing both is essential. And sometimes it feels like it's hard to balance, but I think that is really important. And that's where working with an evaluator or somebody that has some, help at least facilitating a conversation, getting just the roadmap for how you change the community with the intervention is really important. Because the biggest thing, and to me, it's not so much balancing formative versus summative evaluation. The bigger challenge I have is helping people really understand the difference between outputs and outcomes, right? And helping communities see that, okay, we've got to both measure, for example, how many people attended an event, right? How many people were served by this event? That's an output. An outcome is perhaps how the people who attended perceptions were changed, right? Or how their vocabulary around being trauma-informed grew. Or does that make sense? So I think that that's a big piece, is that kind of start there as a coalition, is really try to wrap your mind around, okay, what's the difference between the outputs we're going to deliver and the outcomes we want to achieve? And then how to measure those things.
Could y'all share with some key questions that y'all have used over the years? Because to get the right answers, you got to ask the right questions. But anytime you do a survey and you ask anybody more than about 10 questions, they may not fill it out or glaze over and move on. Could you share some just easy but insightful questions that get responses from people?
Well, I think, Michael, I would say there's a difference between a survey question and an evaluation question. Those are two very different things. I don't usually go into communities and use evaluator speak. Like I don't talk about outputs and outcomes or any of those kinds of things. So when I'm doing a logic model, I'll often do like a tier list logic model approach, or I ask questions that get to the answer without using the the specific language of my field, right? But I just want to kind of go back to your point. So some questions that I might ask are, you know, what are the things that we did? I would probably say it a little bit different. What value was that? Was that even worth our time and resources to do the thing that we did? You know, what results did we, what do we have? What went well? What didn't go well? So those are evaluation questions versus a survey question, which is a whole different, that's a webinar all on its own, how to develop a good survey.
I think the central question has to start with, what are you trying to accomplish together? You know, I would just really think a simple question in terms of who you ask it of, like it starts with your coalition partners. You know, the folks that came together who were funded by Resilient Georgia. What are you trying to accomplish, right? And you got funded for a reason, okay? And so thinking about what you're trying to accomplish, and then also think like, also like to do some visioning sort of early, like in 5 years, how do you see your community being different because of this funding, because of this partnership and this funding and this partnership? Like a dream situation, how do you see the community being different 5 years from now? And then you sort of start there where you want to get to, and you work backwards.
Yep.
That's I think the best thing to do, because if you start thinking about it stepwise and try to go A, B, C, D, E, F, G, it's like you get so overwhelmed so quickly, and everybody's got different ideas about how to get to that destination. I mean, have y'all ever driven in the car? I mean, typically with your partner, right? So funny. In my marriage, been married 11 years to my wonderful husband. And he would tell you that he's a better driver, and I tell you I'm the better driver. Okay. And he typically drives when we're going somewhere. And it's so funny because we lived in Athens this whole time together. And so like we may be wanting to end up at the same destination, but we may take 3, 4, 5 different routes on any given day to get there, right? And the route that he's going to choose is going to be very different from the route that I'm going to choose. And then we have these funny, stupid conversations like whose was going to be faster, or whose made the more sense, or we got stuck in the traffic jam here. If you gone my way, we wouldn't have done that, da, da, da. So don't get stuck. That's an evaluation trap too. I think if you start the conversation, only focus on the conversation about here's how we're going to get there, that's the wrong place to start. I think first you've got to agree on the destination, right? If we can agree on the destination, on the place we want to get to, then we can make decisions about the kind of car we want to drive, right? How much gas we need, you know, how long it's going to take to get there, all that stuff. What restaurant we want to stop at for dinner, God help us on the way there. All right. You see what I'm saying? So I think that metaphor is really helpful to me. I'm glad that that resonates with y'all. And you know, it's so funny. I had this conversation with my husband this morning about picking their battles. Like we're 11 years strong in our marriage, and I'm like, so anyways, I just think that that's really, really helpful. And don't be afraid to ask the big questions first, because that's where the common vision, common values are going to come. If you can coalesce around that, that'll be awesome. Then your other like variation in how you believe you get there won't be as important if you can all agree here. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, one exercise you might want to think about doing with your group is write the last paragraph of our evaluation report. What do you want it to say? Really helps people zone in. Or we want more of this and less of that, right? We want more collaboration, less conflict. We want, more stories, less, no data, or whatever it is. I'm totally making that up, right? But I think we gave you some nuggets today.
Absolutely, yes. I think that it couldn't have asked for better panelists here, better experts to share with us. So again, Grace, Anne, thank you guys so much. I want to make sure we're mindful of our time today. So I think that's all we've got for today. But again, thank you guys for showing up, for being here, answering questions. Thank you guys for bringing questions with you. I think this has been really incredible, and I appreciate all y'all. So
yes,
that's all we got.
Thank you so much. We recorded this, so we'll share out in a Monday memo. So feel free to share with your teams so we can spread this amazing wisdom. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.